Hi, everybody. Um, Let me first start with congratulating the Women's Day of the ladies at this platform.
Thank
Before
you.
forgetting, welcome. Uh, my name is Oktay Akdeniz, and being an architect by profession and passionate about 3D photography, I immediately contacted Vanessa and volunteered to give a talk about today's subject, which is 3D photography of architecture. I will start my introduction with the definition of architecture by the German polymath Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Goethe said, architecture is frozen music. So, how do we relate to this? What did he mean by that? One of the most important elements of history is the works of architecture, as you know. And alongside these material proofs like architecture, also the works created by musicians have a special place in the. Just as an orchestra conductor reveals the spirit and the value of the composer in every performance, the same spirit and value are revealed with the capturing of an image of an architectural work by the photographer. So, every architectural work reflects a specific period of history within itself. Similarly, photographs that we take today, over time, will become building blocks of history. Most importantly, not everyone is able to, has the ability and the means to visit and actually see the works of architecture which are spread all over the world. Photography here plays a very key role in making people have an idea about the places and buildings in the form of a visual experience without actually being on the location. How many times during the stereo theater shows, during the 3D congresses, we have enjoyed the places and buildings that we have not seen before. I consider myself lucky because I live in Turkey, which is home to many past civilizations and cultures, and that they have left their traces of architecture and all these cultures since more than 12,000 years. During the preparation of this presentation, I have gone through the folders of my computer to search for 3D architectural photographs. And I found out so far I have visited 168 ancient sites and have taken 3D photographs of those sites. I didn't know about this number really when I just checked through the folders, and it was incredible. I have visited 168 ancient sites. Here is a photograph of the oldest human-made structure at Göbekli Tepe, which is 12,000 years old. That is equivalent to 120 centuries. I've taken this photograph just before it was so famous and not too many people were visiting. Now it has become a tourist attraction, and they made a dome over it. Anyway, I guess many of the three photographers that will share photographs today, the participants, they will share modern or contemporary architecture. To balance it, the ones I'll be sharing will mostly be of historical buildings. Another relation of photography with architecture is the fact that the first objects that were being photographed were buildings. because at the earliest days of photography, long hours of exposure was needed because the sensitive materials of those days were so weak, They needed long hours to expose just to capture a single photograph. So they needed stationary objects. Whatever can be said about architecture and general photography is also true for 3D photography. But 3D photographs of buildings have special conditions and challenges and advantages over 2D photographs. Before continuing with these challenges and advantages, let me quote Frank Lloyd Wright, who is one of the most prominent architects of the 20th century. He said, quote, "The only photograph that can be made of architecture is three-dimensional." That's what Frank Lloyd Wright has said. So what distinguishes the 3D photographs from ordinary photographs? First of all, architecture is about volumes and spaces. A flat image cannot reflect that three-dimensionality. The perception of space, the relation of different elements of the buildings at different planes have to be accentuated, and the viewer has to get the feeling that they are present right at the place where the photograph is taken. Now I will show a few images. I will show first the two-dimensional one, followed by the three-dimensional one. So this is a two-dimensional image of an ancient building. Now compare this with the three-dimensional one. Of course, you can see the difference of the dome, has a volume. And this tunnel, in a mountain, which is also human-made, you don't see much depth here. But when you see it in 3 dimensions, you really notice the difference. The 3-dimensional photography also emphasizes detail and texture that cannot be seen in 2D photography. Using 3D photography for capturing architecture has a slight advantage over other types of 3-dimensional photography. Because the buildings are stationary objects, most of the time a single camera can be used by taking 2 pictures, one at the left and afterwards moving it a little bit sequentially, taking another picture because the building is not moving. Although initially this method may seem very convenient, it has many challenges. Look, here in the Guggenheim Museum in New York, I use an extra wide angle to emphasize the architectural spirit of the building, but moving people have ruined the 3D picture. And I was the last person to leave the museum to be able to take a proper photograph. But of course, you cannot have this opportunity at every occasion. Sometimes people are very far away and they will not distract, they will not notice. And the movement created can be corrected with software like clone brush. And you can use it as seen in this photograph. But when people, start becoming nearer, then you'll have to use a synchronized camera that freezes all moving objects, but Well, here is a lens which is not as wide as the one with a single camera.
Oktay, could you
Yes?
please move your arrow, your mouse, out of the image? Yeah, thank you.
Well, okay, Vanessa. Another problem is the movement of the clouds or smokes or whatever. You see, here the clouds have ruined this photograph. Depending on the direction of the movement of the clouds, they may appear beyond infinity or just a few meters away. If the clouds and your movement is at the same direction, the clouds will appear beyond infinity. But if they are at opposite directions, they'll be just in front of you. Wind is another problem, which means foliage and tree branches. And the shadows created by moving clouds, here we can see both of them. Some trees, because of the wind have moved, and some clouds are at different places. This is also not, a good thing for taking a 3D photograph. And water, if possible, also should be avoided, especially if it appears at different distances, like from the foreground to the background. This is almost impossible to correct with any software. Another challenge of tree photography is it has to be three-dimensional. It has to create depth. This may sound silly, but a two-dimensional photograph of a building taken from far away with correct exposure and from a good point of view will qualify as a very good photograph. But this is not like this in the 3D photography. The 3D photograph, by definition, has to create a sense of depth. And to create depth, the most effective way is to introduce an object in the foreground, preferably an element of that building that is being photographed. In this 3D photograph, the image is only okay. It's not bad, it's a 3D image. But when you include a 3D object related to the character of the building, the effect is accentuated. Here, the foreground object becomes the main subject of the 3D photograph. So it's the choice and the preference of the 3D photographer which effect to choose. Here are two approaches to the foreground object positioning and lens selection that create different 3D effects. This is one, and this is here another one. It's the same position, but different lens selection that creates different effects. I'll keep showing here more examples of including a foreground object because it is the most effective way to create depth. Here, this is just a 3D photograph of cave tombs, and this one with a foreground object included. Sometimes, our furry friends, they will cooperate to create depth in our images. Another approach is increasing the stereo base and achieve a 3D effect of the building, which can be classified as hyper stereo, or as some other people call it, Lilliputhism. Here, this village, we can see it, just a very small. You know, when you take a macro photograph, you use a very small stereo base that makes small bugs appear like giant creatures. The opposite is when you have a long stereo base. In that case, big buildings or big objects become like miniatures, like models. So, okay, this is one. You can, another approach is to create depth. An object can be included to the foreground. But now, is this a photo of the town or a photo of the trees? All depends on the 3D photographer's preferences. The most common used length range in architectural photography vary from very wide angle to medium telephoto lenses. To cover the entire facade of a building, and especially at indoor pictures, wide-angle lenses are preferred. An inherent issue with architectural photography, whether 2D or 3D, is the control of this perspective. Perspective can simply be defined as the size difference of objects at different distances. Contrary to the popular belief, perspective has nothing to do with the focal length of the lens. The only factor that affects the perspective is the distance between the camera and the closest parts of the scenery that is being photographed. When you tilt a camera to take a high-rise building, what happens is, at the bottom, let's say the ground floor or first floor, is very close to you, but the higher floors are hundreds of meters away, so therefore you get a very big perspective, and which is sometimes pleasing and sometimes it's not so pleasing. Perspectives can add certain interest to photographs, but in our daily perception, seeing scenes that are vertical and parallel as they are is a visual habit that we have. Here is an image of a building, an ancient building, of course, with a lot of perspective. Columns are going upwards. A stereo photomaker, SPM, corrects extra perspective to a certain extent, like this one. But to overdo it will create an artificial effect. SPM can also correct barrel distortion created by some wide-angle lenses. Here is another example with more excessive perspective. This structure actually is a cylinder, meaning that the top and the bottom has the same measurements. But I'll prefer to leave it as it is. There are expensive perspective control lenses on the market that control the perspective up to a certain extent by shifting the lens elements compared to the sensor. But these are not so feasible to use in 3D photography. Normal or mid-range telephoto lenses can also be used, especially for 3D photographs of structures from a distance with their surroundings. In such photographs, the planes or the walls of the structure are at different distances appear closest together, like in these examples. These are taken with normal lenses or a medium tele lenses that squeeze the perspective a little bit. Another factor that contributes to the 3D image of a building is the inclusion of a human figure to give you an idea of the scale of the building. Also, framing the structure being photographed within a context that is part of the environment adds depth and dimension to the image. Infrared is also very effective when used in taking 3D photographs of building. It adds contrast to the scene, emphasizes the form of the structure, and increases the feeling of texture. Frank Lloyd Wright had also preferred to have taken the photographs of his designs with infrared film. So here you don't have color, so the form is the main element. Also here the ruins of city and with the nature, it gives a very impressive view of the architectural works here. Another very important factor in taking 3D photograph is the selection of the point of view. It's where you stand to take the picture. Something to be taken care of is being careful not to include any unnecessary objects or any random objects into the stereo frame that is closer than the required distance, which would immediately spoil the 3D effect. Other than that, the same building can be taken from very different points, and that they will create very different effects. Look, this structure, for example, you can take it from the bottom or from the side, and they have really different effects here. Drones are also very useful tools for taking 3D photos of architecture. Without having this aerial view, you cannot have an opportunity to capture the two of the small theaters. So the technique, this is a old Roman theater waiting to be excavated, which is also impossible to capture without being taken from the air. The technique used here is the same as the so-called cha-cha method, which is take one photo and then move away a little bit according to the distance, of course, and then take another photo. Sometimes nature is the greatest architect, and the 3D photographer should be aware of their surroundings. Okay, this is all that I will show today as per the pictures. If we have time, I'll be glad to take any questions.